The snow was falling harder now, thick white flakes that blurred the streetlights into soft halos against the December darkness. She had been sitting outside the community center for almost 40 minutes, her wheelchair stuck in a ridge of ice that had formed where the sidewalk met the entrance ramp. Her fingers had stopped hurting 10 minutes ago, which she knew from her nursing background was a very bad sign. Inside the building, through the frosted glass doors, she could see people moving, laughing, carrying trays of food for the holiday fundraiser that was in full swing. She had tried calling out twice, but her voice barely carried in the cold, and no one had heard. No one had even looked in her direction. And then a man in a maintenance uniform pushed through those doors, spotted her immediately, and did something that would cost him everything he had worked for. But it would also give him something he never expected to find. Jack Porter had worked as the head maintenance supervisor at the Riverside Community Center in Portland, Maine for 7 years. It was a Friday evening in December, and the annual Holiday Hope Fundraiser was the biggest event of the year. The kind of event where donors wrote checks with lots of zeros, where board members showed up in their best clothes, and where everything had to be absolutely perfect. His boss, Gerald Whitmore, the center's director, had made it crystal clear that nothing could go wrong tonight. "This is the night that funds our programs for the entire year," Gerald had said that morning, his voice carrying that particular edge it always got when he was stressed. "The mayor is coming. The Hendersons are coming. Do you understand what that means, Porter?" Jack understood. He always understood. He was 41 years old, a single father to a 9-year-old daughter named Lily who had type 1 diabetes, and he could not afford to lose this job. The health insurance alone was worth more than his salary. Lily's insulin, her continuous glucose monitor, her quarterly endocrinologist appointments, all of it depended on Jack keeping this position and keeping Gerald happy. But Jack Porter was also the kind of man who noticed things other people didn't. It was what made him good at his job, the ability to see the loose screw before it became a safety hazard, the flickering light before it went out completely. His late wife Maria used to call it his superpower, the way he could walk into any room and immediately sense what was wrong. So when he stepped outside at 7:47 p.m. to check on the exterior lights that had been giving him trouble all week, he noticed immediately that something was very wrong. There was a woman in a wheelchair at the bottom of the entrance ramp. She wasn't moving. The snow had begun to accumulate on her shoulders, on her lap, on the blanket that covered her legs. She looked like she was becoming part of the winter landscape, slowly disappearing into the white. Jack didn't hesitate. He was down those steps in seconds, his work boots slipping slightly on the ice, his breath forming clouds in the freezing air. Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman looked up at him, and even in the dim light from the street lamp he could see that her lips had a bluish tint. Her eyes were glassy and unfocused, and when she spoke her words came out slurred and slow. "I can't. My chair is stuck. I tried to call, but nobody heard me. Nobody even looked." Jack's heart rate spiked. He knew the signs of hypothermia. His late wife Maria had been a paramedic before the cancer took her 3 years ago, and she had taught him enough to recognize when someone was in serious trouble. This woman was in serious trouble. "Okay, I've got you," Jack said, already moving behind her wheelchair to assess the situation. The front wheels had wedged into a gap where the ice had heaved the concrete, and the chair was tilted at an angle that made it impossible for her to push herself free. He grabbed the handles and pulled hard, but the ice had formed a grip around the wheels that didn't want to let go. "Hold on," he said. "I need to break this ice." He knelt down, ignoring the cold that immediately soaked through his work pants, and began chipping at the frozen ridge with his keys. It was slow, frustrating work, but after 30 seconds that felt like 30 minutes. The ice cracked enough for him to yank the wheelchair free. He pushed her up the ramp as fast as he safely could, his mind already racing ahead to what needed to happen next. Warm her up slowly, check her extremities, monitor for signs of shock. He pushed through the front doors, and the wall of warm air hit them both like a blessing. Inside, the fundraiser was in full swing. Well-dressed donors mingled near tables covered in white cloths and elaborate centerpieces. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. Servers circulated with trays of appetizers and champagne. And in the middle of it all, Gerald Whitmore stood talking to a distinguished-looking couple who could only be the Hendersons, based on the way Gerald was practically genuflecting in their direction. Jack didn't care about any of that. He wheeled the woman past the coat check, past the sign-in table where a volunteer looked up with confusion, and into the small staff break room at the back of the building. It wasn't fancy, just a table, some chairs, a mini-fridge, and a space heater that Jack cranked up to maximum the moment they entered. "I need to check your hands," Jack said, kneeling in front of her. "Can you feel your fingers?" The woman blinked at him, and some of the fog seemed to clear from her eyes as the warmth began to penetrate. She looked down at her hands, which were bare, red and white in patches, trembling slightly. I think so. They hurt now." "That's good," Jack said, and he meant it with genuine relief. "That's actually really good. Pain means the tissue is still alive. I'm going to get you some warm water to soak them in. Not hot, just warm. And some blankets." He found a basin under the sink, filled it with lukewarm water, and brought it back to her. As she submerged her hands, wincing at the sensation, he draped a blanket he'd grabbed from the lost and found around her shoulders and found another one for her lap. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Marcia," she said. "Marcia Baker." "I'm Jack Porter. Can you tell me what happened, Marcia? How long were you out there?" Marcia's jaw tightened, and Jack could see something shift in her expression, embarrassment and anger fighting for dominance. "I came for the fundraiser. I used to volunteer here for 5 years before my accident. I wanted to support the cause, see some old friends. But when I got here, the accessible entrance was blocked by catering trucks. 3 of them parked right across the ramp like it didn't even exist." Her voice cracked with frustration. "I tried to go around to the front, but the main ramp was covered in ice. I got about halfway up before my wheels slipped into that crack. I tried to push myself out, but every time I moved, the chair just dug in deeper. I called out. I waved at people through the window, but no one saw me. I tried calling on my phone, but my fingers were too cold to work the screen." She wiped at her face with the back of her hand. "I just sat there, watching people laugh and drink champagne while I froze." Jack felt a surge of fury that he had to work hard to keep off his face. He had personally cleared the accessible entrance that morning, made sure it was shoveled and salted. Someone had parked those catering trucks there afterward, and no one had bothered to check that it was still usable. "I'm so sorry," Jack said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. "That should never have happened. Not here, not anywhere." Marcia looked at him with intelligent hazel eyes that were becoming more focused by the minute. "It happens more than you'd think. People don't mean to be cruel. They just don't see us. We're invisible until we're inconvenient." Before Jack could respond, the break room door flew open and Gerald Whitmore stood in the doorway, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Porter, what the hell are you doing back here? The ice sculpture is melting. The mayor wants to know why the heating is uneven in the main hall and you're sitting in the break room having a chat?" Gerald's eyes swept over Marcia, taking in the wheelchair, the blanket, the basin of water. Something calculating flickered across his face. Not concern or empathy, just irritation at an unexpected complication. "Who is this?" "This is Marcia Baker," Jack said, standing up slowly. "She was stuck outside in the cold for almost an hour because the accessible entrance was blocked by catering trucks. She's showing signs of hypothermia. She needs to warm up slowly, and she may need medical attention." Gerald's expression didn't change. If anything, his irritation deepened. "Then call her an ambulance and get back to work. The Hendersons are asking about the lighting in the gallery room, and I need you to fix it now." Jack felt something snap inside him. It was a quiet snap, the kind that doesn't make a sound but changes everything. "She's not cargo, Gerald. She's a person who was left outside in dangerous conditions because we failed to maintain accessibility at our own building. I'm not leaving her alone until I'm sure she's okay." The silence that followed was heavy and dangerous. Gerald's face went from red to a deeper shade of crimson. "Are you refusing a direct order?" "I'm prioritizing a human being's safety over a light fixture," Jack said evenly. If that's refusing an order, then yes. Gerald stepped closer, his voice dropping to a hiss. You have a daughter, Porter, a daughter who needs health insurance, a daughter who needs you to have a job. Think very carefully about what you're doing right now. The threat hung in the air, explicit and ugly. Jack thought about Lily, about her insulin pump, about the constant vigilance required to keep her blood sugar stable. He thought about the stack of medical bills that insurance didn't quite cover, about the apartment they could barely afford, about how quickly everything could fall apart if he lost this job. And then he looked at Marcia, at this woman who had been left to freeze because it was inconvenient for someone to move a truck. He thought about what Maria would say if she could see him now. He thought about the lesson she'd taught him, the one he'd passed on to Lily 1,000 times. How we treat people when it's inconvenient is who we really are. I'm staying with her, Jack said, his voice steady despite the fear churning in his stomach. Fire me if you want, but I'm not leaving. Gerald's smile was thin and cold. Clean out your locker by Monday. He turned and walked out without another word. Jack stood there in the sudden silence, feeling the weight of what he'd just done settle onto his shoulders. He had just thrown away 7 years of work, his health insurance, his ability to provide for his daughter, all for a stranger he'd met 20 minutes ago, and somehow, impossibly, he didn't regret it. You didn't have to do that, Marcia said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Yes, he said simply, turning back to face her. I did. He pulled up a chair and sat down across from her. How are you feeling? Any numbness still? Better, she admitted, flexing her fingers in the warm water. Much better, but Jack, he just fired you. Because of me. Because you wouldn't leave me alone to go fix a light. He fired me because I did the right thing and he didn't like it. That's on him, not you. Don't carry that. Marcia stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. I've cost you your job, your insurance. You said you have a daughter who needs medical care. Lily, she's 9. Jack's voice softened the way it always did when he said, her name. She has type 1 diabetes, diagnosed when she was 5, and she's also the reason I couldn't walk away from you tonight. Marcia looked at him with confusion, and Jack tried to find the words to explain. When Lily was diagnosed, it was terrifying. Suddenly, our whole world was needles and blood sugar checks and counting carbs. But the hardest part wasn't the medical stuff. We learned that. The hardest part was the way some people started looking at Lily afterward, like she was fragile, like she was less, like her condition defined everything about who she was. He paused, feeling old emotions rise up. Maria, my wife, she was the one who taught me that everybody deserves to be seen as a whole person, not as their diagnosis, not as their limitations. She used to say that how we treat people when it's inconvenient is who we really are. When it's easy to be kind, kindness doesn't count for much. It's when it costs you something that it matters. She sounds like a wise woman, Marcia said quietly. She was. She was a paramedic for 12 years. She saw people on the worst days of their lives, and she never lost her compassion. Jack's throat tightened. She died 3 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. By the time they found it, there was nothing anyone could do. I'm so sorry. Me too. Jack managed a small smile. But she left me with Lily, and she left me with that lesson. And tonight, leaving you out there because it was inconvenient to help, that wasn't who I am. So whatever happens next, I can live with my choice. Marcia was quiet for a long moment, her hands still soaking in the basin, her eyes fixed on Jack's face. I was a nurse, she said finally. For 15 years. Emergency room at Maine Medical. I loved it. The chaos, the urgency, the feeling of making a difference in the worst moments of people's lives. What happened? Marcia's jaw tightened. A year and a half ago, I was driving home from a night shift. A drunk driver ran a red light and T-boned my car. I don't remember the impact. I just remember waking up in the hospital where I used to work, with my colleagues looking at me with that expression I recognized from 1,000 other patients, the I'm so sorry expression. She pulled her hands from the water and dried them slowly. The accident damaged my spinal cord. I'm paralyzed from the waist down. I'll never walk again. Jack didn't say anything. He understood that sometimes people needed to tell their story without interruption. My fiancé left me 4 months after, Marcia continued, her voice steady but hollow. His name was David. We'd been together for 3 years. He visited me in the hospital every day at first, said all the right things about loving me no matter what. But then I came home and suddenly all the things we'd planned together, the hiking trips, the beach vacations, none of it was possible anymore. I could see him pulling away day by day. Her voice cracked. One morning he told me he couldn't do it. He said he'd tried to imagine our future together, but he couldn't see it anymore. He wanted someone who could travel with him, explore with him. He said it wasn't my fault, but he couldn't see a future with me. So he left. That's his failing, Jack said quietly but firmly. Not yours. I know that now, but at the time, I believed him. I believed I was broken, that no one would ever want me. I stopped going out, stopped seeing friends, built walls so high I couldn't see over them anymore. What changed? Marcia looked at him with something like wonder. Tonight, you. You risked your job for a complete stranger because you thought I was worth helping, and I realized maybe I've been hiding long enough. Before he could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. A young woman in a server's uniform poked her head in. Mr. Porter, there's a little girl in the lobby asking for you. She says her name is Lily? Jack rushed to the lobby and found Lily standing near the entrance in her pink winter coat with the fake fur hood. Her braids were slightly askew and her face was set in that determined expression that reminded him so much of Maria. Mrs. Chen, their elderly neighbor, stood behind her looking apologetic. Daddy, Lily said, running to him and throwing her arms around his waist. Mrs. Chen said you were in trouble at work. I made her bring me here. Jack knelt down to her level, his hands automatically checking the insulin pump clipped to her waistband. I'm okay, sweetheart. Who told you I was in trouble? Mrs. Chen's daughter called her. She works here too. She said Mr. Whitmore fired you because you helped someone instead of fixing a light. Mrs. Chen stepped forward, wringing her hands. I'm so sorry, Jack. She overheard me on the phone and insisted on coming. She said she'd walk here by herself if I didn't bring her. Jack sighed, but he couldn't be angry. Lily had inherited her mother's stubbornness along with her compassion. It's okay, Mrs. Chen. He turned back to Lily. Yes, Mr. Whitmore fired me, but I did the right thing, Lily. There was a woman who needed help and I couldn't leave her. Lily's face scrunched up the way it did when she was thinking hard. The woman in the wheelchair, is she okay? Can I meet her? Before Jack could answer, he heard wheelchair wheels behind him. Marcia was rolling herself out of the break room, her color much improved, the blanket still around her shoulders. Hello, Marcia said, smiling at Lily. You must be the famous Lily. Your dad talked about you. I'm Marcia. Lily studied her with frank assessment. Are you feeling better? Daddy said you were really cold. Much better, thanks to your father. He's a good man. Lily nodded solemnly. He is. He takes care of me even when it's hard, and he always helps people, even when it gets him in trouble. She paused. Are you going to be okay? Do you have someone to take care of you too? The question hit Marcia visibly, her smile faltering for just a moment. I take care of myself mostly. I've gotten pretty good at it. Lily considered this. Then, with the decisive air of someone who had just solved a complicated problem, she said, You should come to dinner with us. Daddy makes really good spaghetti and our apartment is warm, and then you won't have to be by yourself. Jack felt his face flush. Lily, I'm sure Ms. Baker has plans. Actually, I don't, Marcia said softly, looking at Jack with warmth in her eyes. My plans were this fundraiser, and that didn't exactly work out. I'd love to come. Thank you. Jack's apartment was small, on the 3rd floor of a building with no elevator. He looked at the stairs, then at Marcia. I can carry you up, he said, if you're comfortable with that, or I can bring dinner down here. Marcia was quiet for a moment. You'd carry me up 3 flights of stairs? I've carried heavier loads for less important reasons. She met his eyes. Then yes, I'm comfortable with that. Jack knelt down and Marcia wrapped her arms around his neck. He lifted her carefully and began the climb while Lily ran ahead with the folded wheelchair. By the time they reached the apartment, Jack was winded but trying not to show it. He set Marcia down on the couch and went back for the wheelchair. "Welcome to our home," Lily announced, switching on lights. "That's the kitchen where Daddy makes spaghetti. That's my room with all my books. And that's the bathroom, but you probably don't need a tour of that." Marcia laughed. "It's perfect. It looks lived in, loved." Over the next 2 hours, Jack cooked while Lily gave Marcia a detailed tour, explaining her diabetes supplies with the expertise of a child who'd grown up managing a chronic condition. "This is my glucose monitor," Lily explained. "It tells me what my blood sugar is doing, and this is my insulin pump. It gives me medicine so I can eat whatever I want mostly." "That's really impressive," Marcia said, and Jack could hear she meant it. "You know more about your body than most adults." "I have to," Lily said simply. "Daddy says knowledge is the best medicine, and Mommy was a paramedic, so she taught me lots before she went to heaven. She said being sick doesn't mean being helpless. It just means being prepared." Over dinner, they talked. Marcia shared stories from the ER, the funny ones that didn't violate patient privacy. Jack talked about his work at the community center, the satisfaction of fixing things and making spaces work better for people. Marcia described the rehabilitation process, the frustration and small victories. "The hardest part," she admitted, "wasn't the physical stuff. It was the way people started treating me, like I was made of glass. My own sister started speaking to me in this soft, careful voice, like I'd shatter if she talked normally." "That sounds incredibly lonely," Jack said. "It was. But tonight you yelled at your boss for me. You lost your job for me. You carried me up 3 flights of stairs. And not once have you treated me like I'm fragile." "You're not fragile," Jack said simply. "You're one of the strongest people I've met." The look Marcia gave him was so raw, so vulnerable that Jack had to look away. After Lily's bedtime, Jack found Marcia by the window, looking out at the snow-covered street. Christmas lights from across the way cast colored shadows on her face. "I should call a ride," she said. "It's getting late." "You could stay," Jack said, then immediately flushed. "I mean on the couch. It folds out. It's late and cold and the roads might be icy. Not because I'm trying to. I'm not suggesting." Marcia turned to him, smiling. "I know what you meant, and thank you. But I should get home. I have physical therapy in the morning and all my supplies are at my apartment." He made the call for an accessible taxi, then sat in the chair across from her. "Can I ask you something?" Marcia said. "Anything. Earlier, when you told your boss you wouldn't leave me, you knew what it would cost you. Why did you do it?" "Really?" Jack thought about the question. "Because of something Maria used to say. She said that doing the right thing isn't about what it cost you. It's about what it costs you not to do it. If I had walked away from you tonight, I could have kept my job, but I would have lost something more important." "What?" "The ability to look my daughter in the eye and tell her to always do the right thing, even when it's hard. Maria believed I was a good man. Walking away from you would have proven her wrong. I couldn't do that to her memory." Marcia reached out and took his hand. Her skin was warm now, her grip strong. "Jack Porter, you might be the most genuinely good person I've ever met." "I'm not. I'm just trying to be the person my wife believed I could be." "Maybe that's the same thing." The taxi arrived 10 minutes later. Jack helped Marcia transfer, loaded the wheelchair, and stood in the cold, watching until the taillights disappeared. That night he lay awake staring at the ceiling. He had lost his job. He had no idea how he was going to pay rent or afford Lily's insulin. By all rational measures, this should have been the worst night of his life since Maria died, but he couldn't stop thinking about Marcia's smile. The next morning, his phone rang. An unknown number. "Is this Jack Porter? I'm Elizabeth Chen on the board at the Riverside Community Center. I'd like to discuss what happened last night." They met at a coffee shop. Elizabeth turned out to be Mrs. Chen's daughter, which explained how Lily had learned about his firing. "Here's what happened," Elizabeth said. Gerald Whitmore fired you for refusing to abandon a woman with hypothermia. He did this in front of witnesses, including Martha Henderson, as in the Hendersons who have donated more to our center than all other donors combined. Jack nodded slowly. Mrs. Henderson was furious. She threatened to withdraw her support unless Gerald was removed. As of this morning, he's no longer the director, and I'm here to offer you your job back with a raise and a formal apology. Jack stared at her. You're serious? You're also being considered for the director position. The board was impressed by your character. Take your time deciding, but your old position is waiting regardless. After Elizabeth left, Jack called Marcia. Can I come over? I have news. At her apartment, he told her everything. Gerald's firing, the job offer, the potential promotion. That's incredible, Marcia said. I don't know what to do about the director position, Jack admitted. More money, but more stress, and I have Lily to consider. What does your gut tell you? That I'm good at fixing things. That's what I'm meant to do. Marcia was quiet. Can I tell you something? I've been hiding for almost a year. Last night made me realize I want to stop. I want to go back to work. She hesitated. You mentioned the center does health education programs. Would they hire a nurse in a wheelchair? Jack smiled. I think they might, especially if the new director recommended her. You're going to take the job. I'm going to take it, because you're right about hiding. I've been doing the same thing since Maria died, just surviving, not living. He took her hand. I don't know where this is going, but I know something changed last night, and I don't want to go back. Me neither. The months that followed were the hardest and happiest Jack could remember. He took the director position and discovered he was better at leadership than expected. He hired Marcia to run a new community health program, and she threw herself into the work with passion that transformed everyone who encountered her. They dated slowly, carefully. Lily immediately adopted Marcia as a permanent fixture, and they developed routines: Saturday pancakes, Sunday movies, Wednesday cooking lessons. 6 months in, Jack watched Marcia and Lily working on a science project together and realized with sudden clarity that he was in love. He told her that night, I love you. I think I've loved you since you made Lily explain her insulin pump like it was the most interesting thing you'd ever heard. Marcia's eyes filled with tears. I love you too. I think I've loved you since you knelt in a parking lot and chipped ice off my wheelchair with your car keys. He kissed her then, their first real kiss, and it tasted like possibility. 8 months after that snowy December night, Jack took Marcia back to the community center. The accessible entrance had been completely redesigned with a new ramp, automatic doors, and a small bronze plaque. In honor of Marcia Baker, Jack read aloud, who reminded us that accessibility isn't a convenience. It's a commitment to seeing every person as worthy of welcome. He knelt beside her wheelchair, taking her hands. 1 year ago, I found you in the snow, and something in my life changed forever. I don't want to figure out the future without you. I don't want Lily to grow up without you there. He opened a small velvet box. Marcia Baker, will you marry me? Marcia laughed through her tears. Yes, absolutely yes. They were married in the community center's garden on the anniversary of the night they met. Lily served as flower girl and insisted on reading a passage she'd written about how families come together in unexpected ways. 3 years later, they had moved to a house with a ramped entrance. Marcia directed community health programs for the entire organization. Jack had stepped back to his original maintenance role, happier with his hands in the work. And Lily, now 13, was thriving, talking about becoming a nurse someday like her stepmom. On every anniversary, they returned to the community center to stand by the plaque and remember. Sometimes, Jack would tell Lily, the best things come from the worst moments. Sometimes losing everything is how you find what really matters, and sometimes the person you save ends up saving you right back. Sometimes the job you lose becomes the life you gain. Sometimes the stranger you help becomes the family you always needed. And sometimes love shows up wearing a maintenance uniform, asking if you need help with your wheelchair. This is Jack and Marcia's story, a reminder that real love doesn't look away when things get hard. Real love puts its job on the line, carries you up 3 flights of stairs, and refuses to leave you alone in the cold.